Good morning, everyone. Last month, I started to talk on the chapter 8 of this book, Opening the Hand of Thought. And the title of this chapter is The Way Seeker. And last time I talked on what way seeker means. As I said, this word way seeker is not in the English dictionary, so probably I made up this word. I first translated this lecture, Uchiyama Roshi's last lecture at Antaiji, when I was in Massachusetts, so many years ago. And because I was young, and I liked very strange expressions. I don't care to write a standard, good, polite, sophisticated English, because my translation was for only the people who practice with me. So I never thought of, this translation might be published, and general people read what I was translating. But of course, after that, my strange translation, English translation, was edited and become very good English. So this was not what I translated actually. But anyway, what I said about way seeker last time was way seeker is a almost literal translation of Gudosha. Gu is seek, and Do is way, and Sha means person or people. So person or people who seeks the way is the meaning. So I make this kind of a noun as a way seeker. And this expression, Gudosha, appeared in the Lotus Sutra, in the first chapter of the Lotus Sutra, entitled The Introduction. In that chapter of the Lotus Sutra, Buddha didn't say anything actually. He stopped giving Dharma discourses and started to sit. So he was in in Zazen, and somehow from his forehead he emitted the light, and the light illuminated the entire universe. And people wanted to know what this means. And I think Manjushri said, this is a sign that the Buddha, Tathagata, was going to talk about the Lotus Sutra. That's the final, most basic, complete teaching. And he was going to give that Dharma discourse for people who seek the way. So this Gudosha means, or way seeker means bodhisattvas who are seeking so in this case, this Tao or way or Do means awakening. Chinese people translate Sanskrit word bodhi, awakening, into way for some reason. I don't really understand why. Anyway, so this is Uchiyama Roshi's last lecture, right before he retired. I think he gave this lecture on February 23rd in 1975. And next day, he left Antaiji. So this was really final lecture at Antaiji. of course, this was not the final teaching of Uchiyama Roshi, because when he retired, he was 63 years old. He was 10 years younger than me. So, and he lived until 86. So he lived long time after retirement. I think he was really wise. He had to retire because his physical condition was not good. You know, he was always weak, physically weak person, because he lived with TB. Anyway, so even after his retirement, he gave lectures, not to the Antaiji monks, but to the public at a big temple. And also he wrote many books, and we could visit him whenever we could, and Uchiyama Roshi was available. So his teaching didn't finished at this day, but this is the last teaching at Antaiji. And he said before retirement, he wanted to give some gift to his disciples as words or teachings. And so he memorized and listed what he wanted to transmit to his disciples. And that was these 7 points. So this teaching is basically for his disciples at Antaiji, even though there are many lay people attended the lecture, but he said, today I just talked to my disciples, so please be patient. So this teaching, this lecture was to his disciples, and I was one of them. And particularly about 2 weeks before this lecture, I received Dharma transmission. I was 26 years old. So, this is really kind of an important time in my life. And after I heard this lecture, I thought this is my teacher's kind of a Dharma will. So I have been trying to study Dharma and practice following what he said in this lecture. Because I came to this country, I couldn't do what he did in Japan at Antaiji. But somehow I tried to be, in a sense, creative, and yet try not to lose the essence of what he taught. So this chapter of opening the hand of thought is important to me, and I'm going to retire within less than 2 years. So this is a kind of a good thing to me. I transmit what I received from my teacher to my students at Sanshinji community. So I'd like to start to talk about those 7 points. Let me read the first point. Well, maybe I should first read all the 7 points, and I start to talk on the first one today. His same 7 points of practice he wanted to transmit to his disciples who continued to his teaching and practice after his retirement. Those 7 points are: study and practice the Buddha Dharma, only for the sake of the Buddha Dharma, not for the sake of emotions or worldly ideas. 2. Zazen is our truest and most venerable teacher. 3. Zazen must work concretely in our daily lives as the two practices, that is, vow and repentance, the three minds, magnanimous mind, nurturing mind, and joyful mind. And as the realization of the saying, gaining is delusion, losing is enlightenment. 4. Live by vow, live by vow, and root it deeply. 5. Realizing that development and backsliding are your responsibility alone. Endeavor to practice and develop. 6. Sit silently for 10 years, then for 10 more years, and then for another 10 years. 7. Cooperate with one another and aim to create a place where sincere practitioners can practice without trouble. Those are the 7 points. So the first one is study and practice the Buddha Dharma only for the sake of the Buddha Dharma, not for the sake of emotion or worldly ideas. Maybe today I can only talk one phrase in this sentence, that is, study and practice the Buddha Dharma only for the sake of the Buddha Dharma. This is a famous saying of Dogen. So Uchiyama Roshi quote Dogen's teaching. And this appeared in Shobogen's Zuimonki. Zuimonki is Dogen Zenji's informal Dharma talk to his assembly, to his monks, right after he established his monastery named Koshoji. Probably at that time they didn't have the Dharma hall, so he couldn't give formal Dharma discourses. So instead of that, maybe he had an informal group to talk about the Dharma. And I translated Zuimonki twice. First, I translated almost 30 years ago, about 1980 something. And my translation was published from Shumucho, Sotosho Shumucho, and I think it is still available. But that translation was based on Menzan's version. Menzan was a famous, important Soto Zen master in the 17th to 18th century, I think. And he liked, or he thought Zuimonki is very important. But the text, until then, no text was published. So all the text was copied by hand. So the manuscript he had found or had many mistakes. In the process of copying, there must be some mistakes. Even today, we find a type of mistake. Anyway, so he tried to made a most complete, authentic manuscript, and he kind of made revision to make the text most understandable for him. He was really a great scholar, so he could find the mistakes and he made changes. And though Menzan version was published as a wood block printing while he was alive, so that was probably 18th century. And once those texts were published as a wood block printing, the written hand-copied manuscript were not used anymore. So those are stored in the temple storage, and many people started to read Zoimonki with that published version called Menzan's version. And my first translation was based on that Menzan's version. But after World War II, the second half of 20th century, Dogen scholars started to think that was a problem. Not only Zoimonki, but all of Dogen's text, we had studied until around that time, was in a sense revised and interpreted by those great Tokugawa period Zen masters. So we studied Dogen through those Zen masters' understanding. And modern scholars after the second half of 20th century tried to to discover the older handwritten versions and try to compare. And they found some difference. So today, we kind of studied Dogen being free from those Tokugawa period Zen master's interpretation. So this is a kind of a new age of Dogen in a sense. And about Zoimonki, before there was one handwritten, hand-copied manuscript before older than Menzan's version. That was called Chōenji. Chōenji Bon or Chōenji manuscript or version. And today, Dogen scholar studies Zoimonki with this manuscript. So I wanted to make a new translation based on this one. And I think for a few years we studied this version of Zoimonki here on Wednesday study group. And after we completed the study group, I asked Doju to edit my translation. And we added more footnote, and it will be published probably next spring. So Zoimonki is also important text to me. When I finished Komaza University and started to practice at Antaiji, I thought since when I was a high school and university student, so for 7 years, what I did was only reading books and thinking. And when I started to practice at Antaiji, I did too much, at least to me. So I try not to read books, and I put all the books I brought, I sent from Tokyo. I put it in the closet and try not to read them. But I read only this text, Zuimonki, many times. Zuimonki is quite short. It's much shorter than Shobogenzo. And, because I know what Dogen said after reading the text, many times. When I read the first sentence, I knew what he was going to talk. But I continued to talk because Uchiyama Roshi said it's important to read and digest it until Dogen's word came from inside. So Zuimonki was the only text I read while I was at Antaiji. Anyway, so what I'm talking. Oh. Study and practice Buddha Dharma only for the sake of the Buddha Dharma. That was one of the important teaching of Dogen. So I'd like to introduce what Dogen said. Well, this day, I sometimes forget what I was talking. So it's important to return, to remember and return what I'm talking. Anyway, this appeared in Choenji version, book 6-2. And in the Menzan version, this must be 5. Let me read what Dogen said. Dogen instructed, student of the way, we should not study the Buddha Dharma for the sake of our own ego-centered self. Ego-centered is in the bracket, means Dogen didn't say so. Dogen only said, for the sake of for our own self, for ourselves. We should study the Buddha Dharma simply for the sake of the Buddha Dharma. So Uchiyama Roshi quote this sentence: we should study the Buddha Dharma simply for the sake of the Buddha Dharma, not for our own. The genuine way to do so is to completely cast away body and mind, leaving nothing behind, and dedicating ourselves to the great ocean of the Buddha Dharma. After that, without being concerned about the right and wrong of each thing, without clinging to our own views, even if it is difficult to endure, we should allow ourselves to be used by the Buddha Dharma when doing things. Even if we want to do something, we should give it up if it is not in accordance with the principles of the Buddha Dharma. We should never ever expect to obtain good result in exchange for our effort in practicing the Buddha way. Once we are dedicated to the Buddha way, we should never look back at ourselves. We should just continue practicing in accordance with the regulations of the Buddha Dharma, without considering twisted personal views. The examples of past practitioners have all been like this. When we no longer seek anything on the basis of our ego-centered mind, this itself is great peace and joy. This great peace and joy is a translation of Sanskrit or Chinese or Japanese word anraku. An is to be peaceful, and rak is comfortable. And anrak is a translation of Sanskrit word sukha. S-U-K-K-A or sukha. Sukha is a pair with the famous word dukkha. Dukkha means suffering. So sukha or anrak means nirvana. So this is really important teaching of Dogen to his monks. So those people are already left their home and became Buddhist monks. That means they left the world. So this teaching is about what is the difference between worldly way of life and beyond the worldly way of life. That's a practice for monks. The practice for the monks who left the world, give up the privileges, any possessions in the world, and became a monk and received the precept and possess only one bowl for begging and 3 robes, and lived in a monastery. So, the teaching to the monks in Sanskrit called Lokottara. Lokottara. In Japanese, this is called Shusseken. Seken means world, and shutsu means leave or exit. And Lokottara and the other thing is Laukika. Both Loka and Lau came from Loka. Sanskrit word Loka, that means world. So Laukika is the world or the way people live in the world. And Kottara is a Loka and Uttara. Uttara means to transcend or beyond. So usually in English, this is translated as beyond worldly Dharma. And worldly Dharma is called Laukika. So there are 2 ways of life. And when people became Buddhist monk, they need to follow the way of Lokottara. And they people live following Laukika. And the teaching for the lay people is do good thing and not do evil. If you do good thing, you will be born in the heaven or better places in the next life. If you do evil, you will be born in difficult realm, such as the hell or realm of hungry ghost or animal. That is what Buddha taught, or Buddhist teaching taught to the lay people. Encourage doing wholesome action and avoid unwholesome. But as a Lokottara, as a monk's practice or understanding, Buddha taught we need to go beyond good and bad. Good, to make separation or discrimination between good and bad, and to do good thing in order to gain a good result. To be born in the heaven is one of the examples of the good result by doing this wholesome action. And because we don't want to go to hell, and yet we want to go to be born in the heaven, we do good thing. That is a kind of a common way we live, to avoid something we don't want and to seek something we want. And according to Buddhist teaching, that is how people live in the world. And people who become Buddhist monk need to go beyond the attachment or discrimination to be this good and bad, and also become free from the desire to be born in the heaven and to avoid the hell. So within this there is a good and bad. One of the most famous verse in the Dhammapada, from the Dhammapada, is do good and don't do evil, and keep your mind pure. This is the teaching of all Buddhas. In this case, the first two lines, not do evil and practice good, is about this teaching. And keep your mind pure or clean means the way monks live. That means going beyond such desire to gain good result from our good actions. And the Four Noble Truths is the same within this structure. What Buddha said is to live in this way is suffering. Life in the world is suffering. And the cause of the suffering is delusion and delusive desires. And there is another cause and result, that is cessation of suffering. And cause of cessation of suffering is practice. That it was Eightfold Noble Path. So there are, in Four Noble Truths, there are two sets of cause and result, and cause and result. And the first one, delusion or desire and suffering, is called Laukika. And when we became a monk and practice Eightfold Noble Path, then we receive or we can reach the cessation of suffering. So these two are two different ways. And this expression way seeker or way seeking mind means we seek cessation of suffering. So when we allowed bodhicitta and practice Eightfold Noble Path, we are within this, the way of Lokottara. And this is what meant to study and practice Buddha Dharma for the sake of Buddha Dharma, not to gain something good, something valuable or desired. So when we read this kind of teaching by Dogen, he is talking about how how Buddhist monks, or the monks who wanted to practice with Dogen, need to determine. The monks should not practice for the sake of something, to gain something, but just to practice for the sake of the Dharma. I have been talking about this good for nothing. The good for nothing is Shohaku Roshi's expression. That is good for nothing means we should not practice to gain something good. So Shohaku Roshi's expression, that is good for nothing, came from this teaching of Dogen, and also this teaching of Shakyamuni, and also Bodhidharma's teaching. For example, when Emperor Wu said, I did such and such things to support Buddhism, what is the merit I can receive? Then Bodhidharma said, no merit. So those are all, Shakyamuni and Bodhidharma, Dogen and Shohaku Roshi are all talking about this side. So what a Buddhist monk should do is to give up this way of life and settle down within this path. And that is a problem. Problem to me or to us. That means, this separation between worldly and beyond worldly dharmas are the problem, at least in Mahayana Buddhism. So one of the most important teaching of Mahayana Buddhism, for example, mentioned in the Heart Sutra is no suffering, no cause, no cessation of suffering, and no way, no practice, no way or no path to lead a cessation of suffering. This no, in the Heart Sutra means there's no such separation between these two. And Nagarjuna also said, samsara and nirvana. This is called samsara, and this is nirvana. And Nagarjuna said, there's no such separation or discrimination between samsara and nirvana. These are really one thing. So as a philosophy, within Mahayana teaching, this separation or discrimination was transcended. But as an actual practice, even within Mahayana teachings or Mahayana traditions, still, monks practice within the monastery, and lay Buddhist practice with the world is kind of separated, I think, until Uchiyama Roshi. Antaiji was a small temple, and Antaiji has no family members. That means no regular income. So Uchiyama Roshi had to, and we also had to support our practice by doing takuhatsu. Takuhatsu is begging. So the Antaiji is basically the community of monks who left home and became his disciples. And of course, Antaiji was open to lay people. Uchiyama Roshi welcome any lay people, and they could come participate in the session. And Uchiyama Roshi never requested any donation from the lay people. Of course, some of them did. But when, before I became a monk, I never paid anything. In the information of session, it only said, bring 1 cup of rice for 1 meal you plan to eat during staying at Antaiji. I'm sorry, but I never brought any cup of rice. So I was not a good student. Anyway, but so Antaiji was a community of monks, and to me, it's really kind of attractive because Antaiji has nothing to do with the worldly economy. We could just live by begging. By begging means there's no thread. If we receive some fixed donation with lay people, and that is a problem in Japanese Buddhism, because Japanese Buddhist temples are supported by lay people. Priest needs to follow the logika. So there's no one problem separation between Lokottara and logika, but another problem, opposite problem, is confusion. So to me, Antaiji was the only Buddhist temple. There's no such confusion or influence from worldly evaluation, worldly value. So we could only practice for the sake of practice, or study Dharma only for the sake of the Dharma. So that was the most important point of Uchiyama Roshi's teaching and practice at Antaiji. So because Antaiji was a small and poor temple without any support, he could practice for the sake of the Dharma, only for the sake of Dharma. So Antaiji was very kind of a exceptional Sangha or temple. So, this, and Uchiyama Roshi says in this lecture, and what Dogen said in Zuimonki, I think is basically the same. We should follow the Lokottara beyond worldly way. But then how can we embrace the people in the world? If we are Bodhisattva, we should not escape from samsara. So how can we work with people in the world? That is another point we really need to think. After Uchiyama Roshi retired, I went to Massachusetts and practiced at Valley Zendo. We tried to continue the same way as Uchiyama Roshi did at Antaiji. So we never asked donation from session participants or lay people who visit us. I was a treasurer, and I made a kind of a policy about donation. I said, it is said, no donation requested and no donation rejected. So we never charge anything from the visitors. But because of that, we had to support ourselves. So we had a job. For example, at the top shop, we worked each person worked 2 days a week or so. And we had 3 people, and we could gain about $500, and that was enough to survive. And that is how we continue to work the place to make Zendo, and also to survive. But it's interesting. American life is interesting. In the beginning, we didn't have driver's license. So in order to go to shop, we had to walk about 1 hour to the nearest village. And in order to go to work, that is about 20 miles away, we had to do hitchhiking. So we thought we need a car. And the first car we bought cost about $200. It's really old, almost broken car. And probably about half of the money we get from the job is used for fixing that car. So that was the way we practiced. And because I was young, I enjoyed that way of life. I was grown up in the city in Osaka, so live in the nature, in the countryside, in the woods, in the western Massachusetts was really enjoyable to me. And I was strong, healthy and strong. So I thought I could do anything. But one of the problems I had during that 5 years was no one came. Of course, at that time, there are several big Zen centers, such as San Francisco Zen Center or Zen Center of Los Angeles or other things. And sometimes people came from those Zen centers. They couldn't sit 5-day session. So I was kind of disillusioned or disappointed. It said many Americans wanted to practice Zen. But when we started to practice, like what I did at Antaiji, no one could sit, no one could practice as we did. That was the problem to me. And also another problem, what is the meaning of just sitting, 3 Japanese monks sitting in the woods in the western Massachusetts, and no one knew and no one came. Even they come, they couldn't. Anyway, after 5 years, my body was half broken, so I had to go to Japan. And Uchiyama Roshi asked me to translate Dogen's and his books. So because I couldn't work so much because of my physical condition, my main practice and work is just practice Zen as much as my body could allow me, and working translation. And when I came to this country again in 1993, first 3 years I practiced at MZMC. And when I started to create my own Sangha, that is Sanshin, I tried to find a middle way. Ballet Zendo was kind of too isolated. I like that life and that practice, but I had a kind of a question if that kind of practice, who not many Americans could do, is meaningful or not. So when I tried to establish my own community or practice Sangha, I want to make a little more open and try to create a place more people could come, and yet without losing or without water down the essence. So what I did was, because my main work was translation, I tried to study Shobo Genzo and Uchiyama Roshi's writing, and I did 5-day session. Although I knew, not so many people could, practice, but instead of 12 5-day session, I decided to have 5 sessions a year, and other months I try to have a retreat that can more people can participate. So that is a kind of my vision about this practice, the center called Sanshinji. And my idea was how these two can be, how can I say, embrace each other and yet not mix, not confusion, not confusion. So we need to understand Buddha Dharma should be studied and practiced only for the Buddha Dharma. And yet people working in the world can participate. Those two sides is, to me, really important. So, at least for now, it's kind of difficult to really establish a place like Antaiji. At Antaiji, the temple building were already there. So we don't need to build. But at Ballet Zendo, we had to clean the land and build the Zendo by ourselves. And we have to work to support our practice. When we were young, we could do, but when I'm 73, I cannot do. So what is the middle way between these two, and without making confusion, is what I received, transmitted from my teacher, and yet I couldn't do completely imitate what he did. He could do. So I had to make, I have to be a creative. And this is what we are here. So I'm sorry for Hoko. She needs to create something more, how can I say, because I still put emphasis on this side to study and practice for the sake of Dharma. So, not many kind of beginners, to study Dogen is kind of too much for people who are not familiar with basic teaching of Buddhism. And 5-day session is not for the beginners. So I think Hoko needs to kind of cultivate the soil and to make practice at Sanshinji more kind of accessible for more wide range of people. But I thought my mission was to introduce what I taught, what I was taught from my teacher, and continue to practice. I was trained, so I don't care about how many people could come. My mission was to introducing, and how American people receive it, understand it, digest it, and practice it is depend on American people. So this is kind of your koan or your homework. Well, it's already 11. So, I don't think I need to talk about this teaching about, study and practice only for the sake of Dharma. Because I have been talking for 20 years. But today I talked, this is a koan. So I expect, American practitioners can cultivate and practice and create, kind of a rich soil of this spiritual practice in the way that can be practiced and meaningful within this American society today, without losing what the Buddha taught, the spirit of Buddha's and Dogen's and Uchiyama Roshi teaching. That is not for fulfill our desire. Well, this is what I have to say this morning. Any comments or question, please?
If I understood right, I think at one point you said that there was confusion between the two approaches. And I think if I heard right, it sounded like you said in Japan in particular, in most temples there was that. Could you say a little bit more about what you mean by confusion? You mean like the temple had to sort of cater to the community or the government?
Well, when I talk a long history from Dogen, in the case of Soto Zen, Dogen lived in the 13th century, and when Tokugawa period started around 17th century, so about 400 years. When Dogen was alive, there was only one Soto Zen temple, that was Eiheiji, and only one Soto Zen master, that was Dogen. But he had some disciples. The first one, the oldest one was Ejo, and Ejo take over Eiheiji from Dogen. And during this 400 years, Soto Zen, Soto school became one of the largest Buddhist denominations in Japanese Buddhism. It said beginning of the Tokugawa period, there were 15,000 temples. That means almost all the towns and villages, there was at least one temple, even today. So this is the time, Soto Zen temple were developed and the number was included. But another side of that history is, in Soto Zen study, these 400 years was called Dark Age. That means, the Soto Zen spread all over Japan not because of Shikantaza, not because of Dogen's Shobogenzo, but not only Soto school, but all Japanese schools today are kind of accepted within Japanese society or Japanese culture as at least one big function within Japanese community, Japanese culture, that is worshipping ancestors, ancestor worship. So, before that, before Kamakura era, Buddhism served only for the aristocrat or samurai class or rich people. Common people had no kind of didn't receive Dharma teachings, and any ceremony was done for common people. But after Dogen's death, those so-called Kamakura New Buddhism, and Dogen's was one of them, became popular because those priests did funeral ceremony for common people. That was the reason, all those, including Soto tradition, became popular and spread all over Japan. Not because Dogen's Shobogenzo or practice of just sitting. So before 17th century, that was a main work for Buddhist priest. And I think in the beginning, that is a kind of a method or skillful means to keep the monastic practice for monks. And actually until 19th century, until Meiji era, Dogen's teaching was studied only within monastery, and that Shikantaza was practiced only within the monasteries by monks. And when those monks, after complete training and return to their own temple, small temple, what they did was taking care of, the lay people by doing such as a funeral ceremony or memorial ceremonies. And particularly after Tokugawa period, Tokugawa shogunate government forced all Japanese become a member of 13 Buddhist temples. So Japanese, all 100% of Japanese people had to be a member of 13 Buddhist temples. This was done by the government to, to keep Christianity out. Christian, well, when I start to talk about this history, there's no end. But so Japanese Buddhist temple has some function, serving for lay community, and that is not really, offering Dogen's teaching or Shikantaza practice. Recently, the book of Ryokan was published from Dogen Institute. I wrote about Ryokan's life. And one thing that is interesting in Ryokan's life, he lived in the second half of 18th century and first half of 19th century. I think he died 1831 or 2. From his poetry, we can see Ryokan practice Zazen in his entire life. But he did by himself. There's no evidence that he encouraged lay people to practice Zazen with him. So I think for him, Zazen is not practice for lay people. But another interesting thing is, Sawaki Roshi was born, I think, 1882 or 3. So only 50 years after Ryokan's death. But between these 50 years, there's a big change in Japanese Buddhism. That was Meiji Restoration, and the government declared we don't support Buddhism anymore. So Buddhist schools need to be independent from the government. They lost the support from the government. And, that was a really big change. And Sawaki Roshi's generation, Sawaki Roshi and several other Roshis, the masters, started to encourage lay people to practice. Especially Sawaki Roshi didn't have a temple. So he traveled all over Japan and encouraged lay people to practice. So thousands of lay people started to practice. That is what I mean. But the rest of the Sotoshu temple, almost 15,000 temples, what priests mainly do is still, kind of taking care of lay families by doing funeral ceremony and memorial ceremony, and also, other things. That is what I meant, The reason Soto Zen school became such a big denomination with so many temples were not because people, Japanese people wanted to practice shikantaza. That is what I meant. I'm tired. Any other question or comment? So now today in America, we have no such, system. So we can practice as we wish. And there's no such clear distinction between monks or priests and lay people. Even I have a family and job, and lay people, can come to practice Zazen and study Dogen. So I think now we have a possibility to create something new in the, entire history of Buddhism. In the Mahayana teaching, as a teaching or philosophy, the separation between monks or worldly Dharma and beyond world Dharma are kind of transcended. And yet, as actual activities, these are still in Asian Buddhism, still separate. But there's some possibility in this country now that as a practice, these two can be together. And yet one important point we should not forget is to mix it, confuse these two. And one of the kind of a problem is to make, for example, Zazen practice or meditation practice in order to make it kind of a useful for lay or for worldly purpose. So this is not my problem, this is your problem. So I appreciate your practice. Well, any more question or comment, please?
First of all, just thank you for this very clarifying to have this framework of sort of two ways, and very sort of clear what we're sort of working on is to bring those ways into some kind of balance. And I'm looking forward to that soil cultivation with you guys. But I guess I lost my question in there.
That's good. I don't need to answer. Okay, anything else? Okay, do you have something?
I was just wondering if someone on the screen has
Can we hear through Zoom?
Yeah, they should be able to.
Speaker is up there, you should be able to.
I don't think so. Okay, thank you very much.